بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Alhamdulillah, welcome to another class. We have bi'idhnillah reached the chapter or the section on what will break our fast. So I know everything was that we talked about before previously was a bit of a preface to this chapter. That was establishing the month, that was, understanding what a month was, what an intention was. And now we're really going to get into the heart of our fiqh, which is the discussion about what breaks our fast. And they typically will break up this chapter into 4 different sections. It's going to be what breaks our fast and requires a kafara, an expiation. What breaks our fast but does not require an expiation. What doesn't even break our fast, even though you might think it does. And then what is just recommended or disliked and doesn't break your fast and doesn't require anything, but is either recommended or disliked to do during your fast or during Ramadan, inshallah. So we're going to try and get through everything in this class and the next class. Depending on whether or not people are interested, we can do itikaf as well. Or we can just keep it at Som. I'm okay either way, inshallah. So, but we're gonna try and finish, inshallah, within the next class, inshallah. So we're gonna get through a lot today. So bismillah. So here we have our book. So the last thing we mentioned was on the topic on Yom Shak. So we are still talking about whether or not the day that the month has come in. So alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us to allow us to reach the 7th or sorry, the 10th day of Ramadan. So it's about time that we learn, at least for the rest of the month. I know it's a bit late, but at least for the rest of the month, what breaks our fast and what doesn't. So فصل ما يفطر الصائم ويوجب القضاء والكفارة. Right, what breaks the fast and requires a makeup and an expiation. قال المصنف رحمه الله: ومن جامع أو جمع في أحد السبيلين عامدا أو أكل أو شرب عامدا غذاء أو دواء وهو صائم في رمضان عليه القضاء والكفارة مثل المظاهر، ولا خلاف في وجوب القضاء والوجوب الكفارة بالإجماع ولقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم للأعرابي حين قال: واقعت أهلي في نهار رمضان متعمدا أعتق رقبة. ولقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: من أفطر في نهار رمضان فعليه ما على مظاهر ولا يشترط الإنزال لوجود الجماع دونه. وروى الحسن عن أبي حنيفة رحمهم الله تعالى عدم وجوب الكفارة في الإيلاج بالدبر اعتبارا بالحد، فصحيح الأول لقضاء الشهوة على الكمال. وأما المرأة فيجب عليها إذا كانت مطاوعة لعموم الحديث الثاني، ولأن هذا الفعل يقوم بهما فيجب عليها ما يجب عليه كالغسل والحد، وإن كانت مكرهة لا كفارة عليها كما في النسيان لاستوائهما في الحكم بالحديث. ولو أكرهت زوجها فجامعها يجب عليهما. وعن محمد رحمه الله: لا كفارة عليه للإكراه، ولو علمت بطلوع الفجر دونه وكتمته عنه حتى جامعها كالكفارة عليها خاصة. Okay, so he says that, what does the Nas say? The Nas says, and whoever has sexual relations, intercourse, in any of the 2 private parts intentionally, or he eats or drinks something which nourishes him or heals him, medicine, intentionally, while he is fasting, he has to make up the fast later, not in Ramadan, and he has to give an expiation like the expiation of al-mudahir. So what is the mudahir? We're going to just talk about this because he doesn't actually mention this, because it's mentioned in a previous chapter Fiqh in Bihar. So the punishment, the kafara is to fast 60 days consecutively. So outside of Ramadan, and the days of Eid cannot be in those 6 days. So 60 days outside of Ramadan and outside of the Eid days, you have to fast consecutively if one were to have broken their fast intentionally in what we mentioned. Okay. And now if they are unable, so they cannot fast, and what this means is that they literally genuinely they have a doctor's opinion or they have previous experience that it is physically not possible. Not that it's extremely difficult. They tried once and they failed. They tried twice, it was hard. No, it literally is too hard for them. Like someone who is sick, then in that case, then they can pay the expiation, which is 2.2 kg of wheat or 4.4 kg of barley or dates, right? Or raisins, or the monetary equivalent of that, 260 poor people, 260 poor people, right? So you pay that to 60 poor people, or you just feed 60 people, right? You feed 60 people to their full twice, right? For 60 days, right? So you give them, for example, like breakfast and dinner for 60 days, or 60 people, or you give 60 people the monetary equivalent of 2.2 kg or 4.4 kg of dates, which ends up being around $5 or $10, depending on which one you take. So the easiest way and the most beneficial is the money, right? That's the thing that people can use the most. So someone should give around $10 to 60 poor people, right? 60 poor people, right? So that is the kafara, right? So if one cannot fast, then they pay this amount, inshallah, and they make tawbah, and Allah will forgive them, and they have to make up that fast. And the kafara was for the intention. It's like a punishment. It's because you outwardly, right, directly broke Allah's command when you knew what you were doing, right? So this is one of the only punishments that we see a physical repercussion, i.e. in this world, right? For example, if you miss your salah intentionally, right, one did that, there might, and no one knew, for example, then in that case, there's no punishment on you. Obviously, there's a punishment from Allah, but there's nothing legislated for that, right? Whereas this, if one did this, right, then there is a punishment. They have to do this in order for them to remove that burden, to remove that sin, right? So it's that's because Ramadan has that high importance and the tremendous reward that it carries. It also carries a hurma, a sanctity, a sacredness, which means you cannot break it lightly. You cannot just break it and then move on with your life intentionally. You have to then pay the kafara. So now we're going to talk about every one of the nas. We're going to mention every one of those. So I'm going to explain it. So he says, when it comes to jima', as for intercourse, there is ijma' that of the ummah, basically, that you have to, or of the madhab, but I think of every madhab of the Muslim ummah, that you have to make up the day and you also have to pay the kafara. So there's ijma' on that opinion. And there's also a hadith which said, when Prophet he said to a Bedouin, and the Bedouin said to him, I have engaged in sexual intercourse with my wife in the day of Ramadan intentionally. And the Prophet said to him, free a slave. So the original punishment was to free a slave. And if you weren't able to, then you fast. So there's no slaves anymore, right? So that's been abolished. So because of that, you have to fast. And the Prophet, he also said, "Man aftara fi nahari Ramadan," whoever breaks their fast in the day of Ramadan, فعليه ما على المظاهر. It is obligatory upon him. What is obligatory upon? The مظاهر, the one who breaks his ظهار. ولا يشترط الإنزال لوجود الجماع دونه. It is not a condition to pay the kafara that one has to, and we'll have to be explicit here in this class because it's fiqh. So there's no hayat in the deen, hayat fi deen, and that's how we learn. But it'll be a bit explicit. So there's not a condition that one orgasms or ejaculates for them to have to pay the kafara. It simply means that the act of intercourse itself happens, i.e., the entering of the male private part into the female private part in either side, right? Then that is what entails a kafara, not the actual pleasure that comes from that. And there is a narration from Hassan, the Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. He saw, this is a narration, right? That one would not have to do this, pay a kafara, i.e., if one had intercourse through the anus of the woman, i.e., the backside. So, and the reason why is because in the had punishment, if one is caught committing zina, but in that way, they don't have to pay. There's no had punishment on them. It's only specifically to the actual halal intercourse, right? So because of that, he said that Abu Hanifa, this is an opinion of his that's narrated, that he does not have to pay the kafara. He has to make it up, and he's sinful. Of course, he's sinful, but he doesn't have to. But he doesn't have to pay the kafara. But the strongest opinion is that he actually does, because he completed his. It still has the same image of complete shahwa, of complete desire and fulfilling one's desire. All right. So when we're going to look at, this is a really important qaida from now on. When we're looking at kafaras, we're looking at complete shahwa, a complete desire or fulfilling of desire or satiation of desire or satiation of hunger or benefit to the body, right? Shahwa, maslaha. And we're also looking at qasd, i.e., intention, that he actually intended it. And as soon as there becomes an ishkal in any of those two, either there's an ishkal in his intention, is in his you could say activeness in committing that sin or breaking this fast, or there's a lack of the complete shahwa, that in that case the kafara will be removed, right? Because there's a shubha now, and there's a doubt. And just as the hudud, the had punishments, are removed with doubt, tudra'u bishubuhat, right? Just as, a had punishment, if there's any kind of doubt at all, then there's no had punishment. The same thing here. If there's doubt with regards to any of those two things, then the kafara is no longer mandatory, and just to make it up. Although you might still be sinful. That's why it's also another important thing to mention, that there's a difference between having to pay the kafara and being sinful, right? One could be extremely sinful and not have to pay the kafara, right? So we have to make a distinction about that. Just because one is saying, I say that you don't have to pay the kafara does not mean that it's okay to do it. Does not mean that you're fine to do it, right? And in reality, the sin that you get is worse than the kafara you have to pay, right? The sin from Allah and the relationship you have with Him is worse, right? That you do that directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than for Him then to just have to pay some money or fast 60 days, right? It's worse. So that's the strongest opinion. So that is the first thing with regards to okay, with regards to sexual intercourse. He then mentions, as for a woman, so as for a woman, it's the same thing. The same ruling applies for her. If she willfully engaged in the act. Okay, so that's important. Because the second hadith, which we mentioned, which was that whoever intentionally, breaks their fast intentionally, they have to pay this kafara. It includes the woman who intentionally had intercourse, right? So she did the same. She actively engaged in it. So just as she has to make a ghusl, she also has to pay, or a had punishment. She also has to pay the kafara. But if she was forced, then she does not have to pay the kafara. Just as the person who forgetfully has intercourse doesn't have to pay that kafara, right? Um, because the Prophet mentioned in hadith narrated in Bukhari or Ibn Majah, sorry, إن الله تجاوز عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان واستكره عليه. It's in the Arba'in al-Nawawiyah. Right? Allah has forgiven for my ummah, right? Al-khata, making mistakes, and nisyan, forgetfully doing something, and واستكره عليه, and what they were forced to do. So because it has the same ruling as forgetfulness, right? Then as her being basically forced, in that case, she does not have to pay the kafara. So it is 60 days of kafara, but great question, Muhammad. The 60 days of kafara will count for as many times as one did it. So if one broke their fast intentionally 4 times, they only have to do one kafara. As long as they didn't break or split those with a kafara. So say, for example, one did it in 1 year, and then they did the kafara, and the next year they did another one, they have to do a new one, right? But in the same year, then they have to do that. So, but it's still same thing, right? There's still lots of sin, tons of sin for doing so, but you'd only have to pay one kafara for all of the sins, for all of the acts. Good question, mashallah. So she doesn't have to do a kafara. Now, another question comes up, like, what happens if she forced her husband, right? So the majority of the madhab says that both of them have to pay. There really isn't much of an idea of a woman forcing her husband to do intercourse, because, and I'm not really going to explain this too deeply, but the idea is that his intention is shown by his arousal. That's kind of the idea. So it would, the strongest opinion is that they would both still actually have to pay the kafara if she forced him. Now, but there is an opinion from Muhammad radiallahu anhu that says that he doesn't, right? So because he was forced, he would not have to pay. So that's one opinion. So there's two opinions. And like I said, if something like this did happen, they go to the mufti, they go to the qadi, and he would decide. He'd look at their scenario and then make a decision based off of the different opinions. So there is, leeway in understanding here. Now, if she were to know about Fajr, right? If she were to know about Fajr, for example, or he, right? If he were to know about Fajr, that Fajr came in, right? But she did not tell him, right? Then she has to pay the kafara and not him. Because according to him, right, it was an accident. As an accident, you don't have to pay kafara because it wasn't intentional. You're missing the qasd, you're missing that intent. But she did know that Fajr was in, so she has to pay the full kafara. So that's just the last ruling with regards to intercourse. Okay. Now, I'll read this now. وَأَمَّا وُجُوبُهَا بالأكل والشرب بالغذاء والدواء فللحديث المتقدم وهذا قد أفطر. وروى أبو داود أن رجل جاء إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال شربت في رمضان فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم من غير سفر ولا مرض قال نعم فقال له أعتق رقبة وهذا نص في الباب. وعن علي رضي الله عنه أنه قال إنما الكفارة في الأكل والشرب والجماع. فإن حاضت المرأة أو مرض الرجل مرضا يباح له الفطر سقطت الكفارة لأنه تبين أن ذلك اليوم لم يكن مستحقا عليه صومه. والكفارة إنما تجب بإسناد صوم مستحق عليه بخلاف السفر لأن الكفارة وجبت حقا لله تعالى فلا يقدر على إبطالها بخلاف الحيض والمرض لأنه ليس منه ولو سوفر به مكرها لا يسقط أيضا. وقال زفر رحمه الله يسقط كالمرض والحيض وجوابه أنه حصل من غير صاحب الحق فلا يجعل عذرا بخلاف المرض والحيض. انتهى. So now we're going to talk about food. So as for eating and drinking, things that satiate you. So we're not talking about like eating rocks. We're gonna see that. We're gonna see that later on. And treating oneself with medicine, right? Then this is mentioned in the previous hadith that we saw, right? So if you intentionally break your fast, then you have to pay the kafara. And we mentioned this is with qasd, full intention and full satiation or benefit occurring from that, manfa, maslaha, right? So in all of these cases, eating, drinking, taking medicine, they broke their fast. And Abu Dawood, he narrates that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I drank in Ramadan. And the Prophet ﷺ said, and you were not traveling and you were not sick. He said, yes, I was not sick or and I was not traveling. The Prophet ﷺ then said to him, free a slave. And this is a clear, direct word, nas, right? Text showing the necessity of the kafara. And Ali radiallahu anhu, he also narrates that kafara is only in eating, drinking, and jima, sexual relations. So in all of these, right, if one were to do that, they would have to break their fast. They would break their fast, and it would they'd also have to pay kafara. They'd have to make up the fast and pay kafara, right? So eating, drinking, or eating and drinking medicine, right? Now, separate rulings. So that's just kind of like simple. That's why it's a pretty simple understanding of that. If a woman enters onto her period, she gets her period, or a man becomes sick, a sickness that allows him to break his fast, saqatat al-kafara. He no longer has to pay the kafara. So what happens here? Let's say someone is, or a woman, for example, or a man, they start their day and they break their fast intentionally. They now have to pay kafara. But then during that day, before Maghrib, she gets her period, or he gets so sick that he has to break his fast, right? He no longer has to pay the kafara, because in reality, what became apparent was that that day was no longer obligatory upon him, right? Because she was fast, she had a period, so she couldn't even fast the day anyway. She has to make up that day regardless. And he was so sick that he literally could not fast, or he was able to break his fast. So that day was also not obligatory upon him. So because it wasn't obligatory upon him, he no longer has to make a kafara. So the kafara is only for a fast that is obligatory upon you, right? It's a fast that's obligatory upon you in that moment, and you break it. If it's not actually in reality, it turns out it's not obligatory upon you, then there's no longer a kafara. And that's like, for example, in a nafil fast, if someone intentionally breaks their fast in a nafil fast, there's no kafara, because it was never obligatory upon them, right? So we're looking at direct obligation. Mustahaq, right? But he said, now this does not, though, we have to be careful, it does not carry on to traveling, though, right? So what does this mean? It means someone, goes, they break their fast, and then after they break their fast, they go and travel, i.e. running away from the kafara, thinking that, oh, if I go travel, I don't have to fast, therefore I don't have to pay kafara. Incorrect, because the kafara was obligatory because Allah, right? It's an obligation to Allah. It's Allah's right that you pay the kafara, not your own right, which means that you cannot break it by yourself. You can't just choose to remove it. Only Allah can. And how does that happen? By Allah making you sick or you getting your period. These aren't things that one can control. So because of that, because it wasn't something that you did yourself, i.e., it was something that you were afflicted with, it is removed, i.e., the obligation from Allah is removed, right? As opposed to you intentionally trying to just remove it yourself, right? As the same thing, someone who is forced to travel, let's say like they broke their fast, but then someone grabs them and like travels with them, forces them to travel. It also doesn't remove the kafara, right? Because the fast was still obligatory upon him, right? Because traveling is only a rukhsah before the fast begins. We mentioned that one cannot just break their fast while they're traveling unless they left before sunrise. Actually, we haven't mentioned that. It's going to come. before sunrise, they have to leave, right? So that means that the fast was obligatory upon them. So if just as if someone were to travel normally, that fast would not lose its obligation upon them. For example, it's a normal day. I didn't break my fast and I just go travel. I still have to finish that day. I didn't leave before Fajr. So because of that, uh, the fast is still obligatory upon me in that case. It's still obligatory upon me in the case that I broke my fast before. It doesn't change just because I have a kafara. The obligation doesn't change. So because the obligation doesn't change, the kafara doesn't change. Now let's say the fast was so difficult he had to break his fast. The same ruling applies because he intentionally tried to run away from the hukam, tried to remove it himself by traveling, which you, like I said, you cannot do that. Right? The ruling is from Allah, which means the haqq is only removed by him, not by you. So because of that, you still have to pay the kafara, and you're sinful for trying to run away from a kafara. And the only way that a kafara will drop is if a woman gets her period or a man gets sick. They get sick and they are so sick then that they can no longer fast. Now Zufar, he has an opinion. He says that it's the same thing, right? That it just like hayd and sickness, safar also remove the kafara. But the answer to that is what we mentioned already, is that they're clearly different. That one was removed by the Sahib al-Haq, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One got sick, and therefore, right, the obligation fell, as opposed to one trying to run away from the ruling. And it's the same thing, for example, let's say someone goes into a coma, right? And right, then for more than, I don't want to like get too deep into different. But let's say someone tries to for example, one person gets sick, so I'm realizing that an example will make it a bit more complicated, so I'm going to leave it at that, inshallah. Any questions about that? So that's actually the completion of everything that breaks your fast and requires a kafara. So any questions about that? Okay.
Sheikh, what if the person has some obligation to travel after the sunrise, or once he started his fasting? Like he's not trying to escape from the fast, but like it is obligatory on him to travel on the daytime.
Yeah, so that still would not remove he still has to fast. He still has to fast unless he left before Fajr. And that's kind of the idea. Like if one did leave before Fajr and they're not fasting, then they also don't have to pick kafara because they didn't break anything, right? Because they're not fasting in the very beginning. So you're either fasting or you're not fasting. That's kind of it. Right? But if one did travel and they were not able to fast, they would still have to pay kafara in this case. Right? And normally then they would just have to make up the day if they broke their fast because a situation came up where they had to break their fast out of necessity. So if someone travels and they get so tired that they're going to die or going to get highly sick, then they can break their fast, and that does not require a kafara, right? But that's like someone getting sick, right? That's like something happening where someone got sick.
Yes.
Okay. So now on to what breaks the fast, but does not require a kafara. We're going to finish this inshallah today. وإن جامع فيما دون السبيلين أو بهيمة أو قبر أو لمس فأنزل أو احتقن أو استعطى أو أقطر في أذنه أو داوى جائفة أو آمة فوصل إلى جوفه أو دماغه أو ابتلع الحديد أو الحصاء أو استقاء من أفيه أو تسحر يظنه ليلا والفجر طالع وأفطر يظنه ليلا والشمس طالعة فعليه الكفار لا غير. أما الجماع فيما دون السبيلين والبهيمة مع الإنزال والإنزال باللمس والقبلة فلقضاء إحدى الشهوتين وأنه ينافي الصوم ولا تجب الكفارة لتمكن النقصان في قضاء الشهوة والاحتياط في الصوم الإيجاب لكونها عبادة وفي الكفارات الدرء لأنها من الحدود. Okay, so he said I'm going to read the nas first, and then I'm gonna translate the nas, and then I'm gonna go from there. So he says, and if someone has intercourse outside of the two private parts, or with an animal, or they kiss or touch and then ejaculate, or they take a suppository, or they take a nasal medicine, or they take ear medicine, or they give medicine to a stomach, like a stomach wound that reaches their stomach, or a head wound that reaches their brain, or they eat like metal or straw or dirt, or they intentionally make themselves vomit more than a mouthful, or they break their fast thinking that it is still, or sorry, they eat thinking it is still nighttime and Fajr has actually come in, or they eat thinking that Maghrib has come in and Maghrib has not come in yet. In all of these cases, they have to make up the day, but without a kafara. So all of these we're going to see there's either a shubha in regarding the intent, the qasd, or in the manfa, right? Or in the pleasure, in the satiation, in the benefit of that thing itself. So now he's going to explain what I just mentioned. So he says, as for intercourse in other than the two private parts or with an animal, even with ejaculation, right? Or with ejaculation, with touch or kissing, فلقضاء إحدى الشهوتين وأنه ينافي الصوم, right? So the reason why it breaks the fast is because you are fulfilling a pleasure, right? So you're fulfilling a pleasure, and it also negates the fast itself, right? All of these things negate the fast. Ejaculation or the ejaculation basically breaks the fast, but you do not have to pay the kafara لتمكن النقصان في قضاء الشهوة, right? Because there is a doubt, right? There's less pleasure in fulfilling that need. So the need for sexual relations or pleasure is fulfilled through the normal act of intercourse, right? And what is included with that is the rear, because it has the same exact picture. But everything else that we mentioned here does not have that same surah, that complete picture. So because of that, even if there is intent here, there is not the complete shahwa. The complete shahwa is not fulfilled, right? Which is intercourse, right? So when we're talking about intercourse, what's mentioned in the hadith is intercourse. So all of these things, even though it has the same kind of idea, i.e. that there's still a shahwa that's there, and they still intended it, it's not complete. So that the lack of completeness here removes the kafara, right? And it requires them to make up, and they're sinful. So they're sinful, but they only have to make up the day. They don't have to pay a kafara, right? So what we're looking for eating, drinking, or intercourse in its complete form, in that complete reality or picture of what that is, that act. Okay. And he says this is an important qaida, والاحتياط في الصوم الإيجاب لكونه عبادة. When it comes to fasting, the precautious matter, i.e. ikhtiyat, is to add a day, or is to make it obligatory, right? When we're looking at, we have a kafara and we have a fast, right? The ibadah, we can always add ibadas. We also want to make sure that we avoid missing an ibadah, right? Or having an ibadah being nullified. So because of that, because one of these things happened in the surah of intercourse, then we make the ibadah obligatory. The ibadah, which is to make up the fast itself, becomes obligatory to make it up, because we're being careful with regards to their ibadah because there's a doubt here that it actually did, because it not only broke the fast, but that it actually did like require the complete expiation because you basically did those other things that break the fast. So because of that, we require them to make up the day. But in kafarat, it's the opposite. In kafarat, they're always looking for an excuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it so that it's easy, so that as soon as there is a doubt, just like the had punishment, it falls down. The mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that the had punishment is always looking for a way to not be obligatory. Right? So because of that, because there's a doubt in the way that it happened, it no longer becomes obligatory to pay kafara, inshallah. Okay. So question. But yeah, so one of the wisdoms of the kafara is that it does remove the sin, inshallah. Right? So right, so the obligation, so it is a repentance, right, for your sin. Right? So, but the reason why is lifted is because of the doubt, because it's like a had. That's what the kafara is lifted. Right? But it is an expiation for your sin, for the sin itself. وأما الاحتقان والاستعاط والإقطار في الأذن والدواء الجائفة والآمة فلوصول المفطر إلى الداخل وهو ما فيه مصلحة البدن من الغذاء والدواء. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم الفطر مما دخل ولو أقطر الماء في أذنه لا يفطر لعدم الصورة والمعنى بخلاف الدهن بوجوده معنى وهو إصلاح الدماغ. قال أبي يوسف محمد رحمه الله تعالى لا يفسد الصوم كالجائفة والآمة لأن الشرط عندهما الوصول من منفذ أصلي ولعدم التيقن والوصول لاحتمال ضيق المنفذ وانسداده بالدواء وصارك اليابس وله أن رطوبة الدواء إذا اجتمعت مع رطوبة الجراحة ازداد سيلان إلى الباطن فيصل بخلاف اليابس لأنه ينشف الرطوبة فينسد فم الجراحة. قال مشايخنا رحمه الله تعالى والمعتبر عنده الوصول حتى لو علم بوصول اليابس فاسد ولو علم بعدم وصول الرطب لا يفسد. وأما إذا ابتلع الحديد أو الحصى في صورة الإفطار فلا كفارة لانعدامه معنا. ومن استقاء الملء فيه فلقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قاء فلا قضاء عليه. Right. So before we get into this, remember we're talking about eating and drinking. So what is eating? Eating is to enter something into your body cavity that gives you benefit. Right. So you're intentionally entering something into your body that gives you benefit. Same thing with medicine. And sexual intercourse is to the act itself or the pleasure that comes from that, which is to ejaculate. So that's kind of the usul behind these acts. So it says, as for suppository, right, or taking nose medicine, right, or ear drops, right, or the stomach medicine, the brain medicine, the reason why is because it did reach, right, that medicine, it did reach your stomach, it did reach your body cavity, i.e. your brain is part of your body cavity, your whole body is your body cavity, except for your arms, right? So it's like your torso into your legs and your brain, right? So the mufattir entered into your body, i.e. something that benefited your body because it's medicine, right? It either satiates you or it gives you or it's medicine. And the Prophet he said that what breaks the fast is what enters the body, enters the body cavity, right? So all of these things break the fast, but it's not the same as eating. It doesn't have the same complete benefit as when eating, or surah, as when actually eating or drinking. So because of that, because it's through your nose, it's through your ear, it's through your one's backside, all of these, it was like entered into the stomach because of a medicine, because there's a wound. It's not this complete pleasure and surah picture of one who just ate. So because of that, It does not have a kafara, but it requires one to make up that fast. Right now, if one enters water, so we talked about medicine in their ear. Medicine in one's ear breaks the fast on all opinions. But water uh, does not break the fast because uh, there's no surah. You're not actually benefiting from that by entering water into your ear. There's no actually, it doesn't actually satiate you whatsoever. And there's no even, and the ma'na, right? Because the surah is not there. You're not actually trying, you're not intentionally eating something. So it's like the surah would be eating something. So the surah is gone because you're not eating something, you're entering it through your ear. And the ma'na, i.e., the maslaha, is also gone because you're not benefiting from the water entering into your ear. And that's the strongest opinion. There is an opinion that says that one would have to make up their fast if they entered water into the ear, but the strongest opinion, and this is mentioned in the other books, is that it would not. But medicine in the ear, eardrops does, right? It does break the um the fast, right? And there was a bit of disagreement about this, but modern science has shown that the ear canal actually does connect to the throat. So it actually does enter, and it doesn't just stop here, right, at your ear, right? Um, Now, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, they said that with regards to the stomach wound or the head wound, right, the fast is not broken, right? Because for them, something has to enter through a normal, you could say enter plate, enter a normal hole, a normal entrance, like the ears, like the mouth, right? So because it entered in through the outside, right, someone gave medicine to this massive gaping wound in their stomach. That's not a normal entrance into the body. It does not break the fast. And because you're not sure that what you put, i.e., the medicine in, actually stayed. It actually stayed inside the body, right? Or it just became, hard, or it was just, or it was, it didn't actually stay in the body, or didn't actually enter the body properly. You're not actually sure. And Abu Hanifa, he responds. He basically says that the wetness of the medicine, when it mixes with the wetness of the wound, it actually increases in its flow. So it will enter as opposed to something dry if it was dry medicine, because what happens is that it basically soaks up the dry medicine and stops at the edge of the wound. So it's like dry medicine, right? In this case, it wouldn't actually enter. As for liquid medicine, it would reach it. In reality, this is not about like the science. They're talking about this back then, right? Like 1,000 years ago, right? And how they treated wounds. And this is why the final sentence he mentions is what really matters is the wusul, that something reached the inside of one's cavity. So forget the science, because that's going to change now. What really matters is that something, right, entered into the body and stayed in the body cavity. So whether that was dry or whether that was liquid, it would still break the fast, right? So whether he knew that the liquid did not reach inside, it wouldn't break the fast. And if he knew that the dry did reach inside, that would break the fast, right? So it all matters about whether or not it actually entered into the body cavity and remained there, right? So we're talking about that. That's Abu Hanifa's opinion. The Sahibain say that this would not, because it didn't enter into a normal entrance point, i.e., it happened through a wound, so it wouldn't. So those are two opinions. So that's why, like, if someone's getting treated for medicine, there's an opinion they can take that it wouldn't break their fast. Although the stronger opinion is that it would actually break their fast, according to Abu Hanifa, right? And the science here is not really like, some people get caught up on this and kind of like really trying to understand this. It doesn't matter. We have our own science right now. So regardless whether or not this makes sense or doesn't make sense, is besides the point, right? You'd actually want to look up the actual science of how medicine, how stomach wounds are treated, how brain wounds or head wounds are actually treated nowadays, right? And then go from there, right? So it's not about like how, because they're basing it off of the science that they had and the medicine that they had, which was 1,000 years old, right? He says, as for eating like metal or like clay or dirt or grass, right? Because, or like, sorry, like hay, because this is not complete. There's no complete there's no complete benefit in this. There's no complete satiation in this, right? So the ma'na is not there, right? He ate it, so the surah is there, but the ma'na is gone, which is the benefit. Okay. As for, we've got to finish, inshallah. وأما إذا ابتلع الحديد وأما إذا استقاء الملء فيه فلقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قاء فلا قضاء عليه ومن استقاء فعليه القضاء وروي ذلك عن إكرمة رحمه الله مرفوعا وموقوفا وعن محمد زفر رحمه الله يسده وإن لم يملأ الفم ولم يفصل بينهما في ظاهر رواية إطلاق الحديث والصحيح الفصل وهو رواية الحسن أبي حنيفة رحمه الله لأن ما دون ملء الفم تبع الريق كما لو تجشأ ولا كذلك ملء الفم. Okay. This is as for throw up. So what about throw up? So throw up, if one intentionally, they make themselves throw up for the amount of a mouthful or more, this would break their fast. And this is because the Prophet, he said, whoever throws up, they don't have to make up their fast. But whoever intentionally throws up has to make up their fast. Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah. And Ikrimah narrates from the Prophet and from a Sahabi, and from and that's the same hadith, right? But Muhammad and Zufar have a different opinion. They say that even if it did not reach a full mouthful, it would still break the fast, right? And they did not separate between, right, a mouthful and less than a mouthful, because the hadith was general. The hadith was open. It didn't say, the Prophet didn't say if you intentionally throw up more than a mouthful. He just said if you intentionally throw up, it breaks the fast, right? But the sahih, the strongest opinion in the madhab, right? And this is why it's like really good to know these opinions, right? It gives this breadth to this madhab. It gives this, this openness to the madhab that you wouldn't know if you didn't read these books like this, right? So if you're just reading books with just Abu Hanifa's opinion, you're not getting the whole picture, right? It's really good to have those different opinions, even if we should try and stick to Abu Hanifa. So the strongest opinion, and this is the narration from Hassan, from Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, is that what is less than a mouthful is like it follows one's saliva, because it's the same thing as someone having an acid reflux. There's like an acid reflux, and someone had that, right? Or they basically stuck their, let's say they stuck their hand in their throat and they had an acid reflux. That's basically throw up, which is less than a mouth. It's not really throw up. So throw up has to be a mouthful to consider it breaking the fast, because everything below that, less than that, is like acid reflux. It's like one's saliva. It follows one's saliva. It doesn't have the full picture of one actually throwing up, right? Because it could just be like acid reflux. It's such a little amount, right? But a whole mouthful, that's a real amount to throw up. That's something which really is clear, right? That it's breaking the fast. Okay. The last thing, which we'll finish now. وأما إذا تسحر يظنه ليلا والفجر طالع أو أفطر يظن ليلا والشمس طالعة فإنما يفطر لفوات الركن وهو إمساك ولا كفارة لقيام العذر وهو عدم التعمد والكفارة على الجاني ولو جمعت النائمة والمجنونة فسد صومهما لوجود المفطر ولا كفارة لعدم التعمد ولو استمنى بكف أفطر لوجود الجماع معنا ولا كفارة لعدم الصورة. So he says the last thing. So he says if someone eats while they think that it's still the nighttime, but it's actually Fajr, or reverse at Maghrib time, they break their fast. Their fast is broken because they actually broke their fast, right? They intentionally ate, so their fast is broken. But because you were missing the intention, the qasd, right? They didn't mean to do it. There's no kafara, because the kafara is on the jani, the one who commits as like the immediate like sin, the one who is wronging someone else, the one who is committing committing an act, i.e., someone who intentionally does something that they shouldn't do. So That's what the kafara is for. Right? So someone who didn't know, or who didn't realize, right? They technically broke their fast, but you missed the intention, so it doesn't have the full amount of the full picture of the kafara, so the kafara is not there. And the last ruling, he says that if a woman was basically, her husband had intercourse with her while she was sleeping, right? Or she went crazy. She went crazy. Um, both of their fasts are broken. So the woman who is sleeping, her fast is broken, right? Because she technically had intercourse, but she does not have to pay kafara. So in the last case that we saw, if a woman was forced, her fast is still broken. If she's forced, her fast is broken. You can't say it's not broken. She has to make that fast up, but she's not sinful, and she doesn't have to pay kafara. Same thing here. If she's sleeping, she's not sinful. He is. He has to pay the kafara, but she does not have to pay the kafara. She has to make up her fast. Because but there's no intent, because there's no intent. And if someone intentional, so if someone masturbated, that's what they mean here, with their hand, then it does break their fast because they orgasmed, they had an ejaculation, which is the ma'na of jima'. So the ma'na of jima', i.e., the meaning of it is orgasming, is ejaculation. So it was there, but the picture, i.e., the surah, was not there. I.e., the complete shahwa, the complete can say situation of intercourse, which is what is mentioned before for the kafara, is clearly not there. So they do break their fast. They're very sinful, but they do not have to pay kafara. They just have to make up their fast, inshallah. So alhamdulillah, inshallah, we'll stop here. The next chapter, we're going to talk about what does not break the fast. So things that like you might think break the fast, but don't actually break the fast. Things that happen in our life that don't break the fast. And that's a pretty long chapter. I thought we'd start it today, but alhamdulillah, that's okay. And then we're going to kind of rush through what is makruh for someone to do. And then quickly, it's not actually that quick, it's kind of long. So it might take another day. Right? It's talking about like the fast of someone who is traveling and how they can do that, or if someone, and it's actually important things, like someone, she's on her period and she breaks and her period stops in the day, what does she do? And then it talks about making up for Ramadan. So inshallah, we'll do this. It might take another 2 weeks, so we'll finish by by the end of Ramadan, inshallah. But at least we'll finish. What's really important is that what we just did right now in class is the most important, because the next chapter is talking about what doesn't break your fast. So if you never did it, or even if you did it, you're fine, right? But what we just talked through right now is what breaks your fast or breaks your fast with an expiation. So that's really what matters. Inshallah, may Allah protect us from breaking our fast unintentionally or intentionally, and earning his, or doing anything that displeases him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he keeps us in his protection and the asma of not committing intentional sins, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Any final questions? Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.